In the heart of the African savanna, under the heavy weight of a hot afternoon sun, Zuri stood before her father's grave. The air around her buzzed with the voices of ancestors, their calls barely perceptible, but undeniably present. The burial had been swift, the ceremonies subdued. The elders had spoken, but Zuri could hear nothing over the pounding of her heart. Her father's death had been deemed a tragic accident, but she knew better. That night, she had heard the whispers of betrayal, the faint crack of a gunshot piercing the quiet of the night. Someone had murdered her father, someone close to her, someone who knew his every move. Standing at his grave, Zuri clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. This was no longer about grief. It was about vengeance. Blood for blood. Her father's death would not be forgotten, nor would the truth be buried. Zuri stood before the imposing gates of her uncle's compound, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. She had heard whispers that her father's death wasn't just an accident, that there were hands at play within her own family. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure, each step towards the compound feeling heavier. The guards at the gate eyed her with suspicion as she approached. But Zuri's presence was unwavering, her eyes locked on the towering structure ahead. She had come to seek the truth. The question hung in the air, unspoken but loud in her mind. What had her uncle known, and how far did his involvement reach? Her father's death was no longer a tragedy. It was a puzzle, and she intended to piece it together, no matter the cost. Inside the dimly lit room, Zuri faced her uncle, whose once warm face was now hardened with age and guilt. His eyes shifted nervously as Zuri questioned him, each word she spoke a sharpened knife. "You know who killed my father," she said, her voice low, but full of certainty. Her uncle hesitated, his hands twitching slightly, betraying his calm exterior. For a moment, it seemed as though he would deny everything, but then with a deep sigh, he spoke. "Your father's death wasn't an accident, Zuri. There are forces at work you cannot understand." His words fell heavy on her chest. Betrayal. A deep, familial betrayal. Her uncle had been involved, but the reason was still shrouded in darkness. Zuri clenched her fists, determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant tearing her family apart. Zuri walked away from her uncle's compound, the truth of his involvement weighing heavily on her shoulders. She could not face him again, not without answers. That night, under the cover of darkness, she met with her most trusted ally, Kofi, her childhood friend. "We must act quickly," Zuri said, her voice resolute. "My uncle is part of something much bigger than I imagined." Kofi, a man in his 30s with deep-set eyes and a muscular build, nodded grimly. "We've waited too long, Zuri. It's time to take action." Together they would gather the villagers, rally their community, and take a stand against the corrupt forces threatening to destroy everything Zuri held dear. The battle for her father's legacy, and for her family's honor, was just beginning. The following morning, Zuri stood on a hill, overlooking the village. The weight of her decision felt both heavy and freeing. The time to act had come. She sent word to the village elders, to the men and women who had once fought for the land her father had protected. As they gathered around her, Zuri spoke with passion. "We must fight for what is ours," she said, her voice echoing across the village. "This land, our people, our future, is under threat. We will not stand idly by." The crowd murmured in agreement, some uncertain, others eager. But there was no turning back now. Zuri had united them under one cause, the fight for justice, the fight for the memory of her father, and the fight for their heritage. Zuri's heart pounded as she stood before the gathered villagers, each one with eyes full of hope, fear, and determination. Her words echoed across the field, carrying the weight of a promise. "This is not just about my father's death," she said, her voice firm. "It's about the future of our people. We will no longer be crushed under the boots of those who seek to steal our land and our legacy. We fight not just for us, but for every soul who has been silenced by greed and power." The elders nodded, some with tears in their eyes, while the younger men clenched their fists in anticipation. The wind picked up, carrying their chants across the land. The revolution was no longer just a dream. it was a reality. And Zuri was ready to lead them into battle. As the night settled over the village, Zuri met with her most trusted allies in secret. The plan to confront her uncle was set into motion, but there was one thing Zuri hadn't expected. Her own cousin, Kwam, had betrayed them. Zuri's eyes locked onto his, a mix of shock and fury in her gaze. "How could you?" she demanded. Kwam, in his early 30s, stood there nervously, unable to meet her eyes. "It was for the good of the village," he stammered. "Your uncle promised to bring prosperity, money, land, everything we've been waiting for." Zuri's voice cracked. "At what cost, Kwam? How can you justify standing with the enemy?" Her heart broke as she realized that her own blood had chosen the side of greed. It was a blow that would forever change the course of her fight. Zuri and her remaining allies gathered in the council room, the weight of the recent betrayal still heavy in the air. The elders sat in silence, their faces a mixture of weariness and solemnity. "We cannot allow this to destroy what we have built," Elder Amina said, her voice raspy, but strong. "The strength of our community lies in our unity." Zuri nodded, her determination unwavering. "The fight must go on. We stand together, or we fall apart." But there were those in the council who hesitated, fearful of the consequences. The threat of Kwam's influence loomed large, and many feared that Zuri's path would lead them all to ruin. However, as Zuri looked into the eyes of the elders, she saw the same resolve she felt in her bones. There was no turning back. Zuri's heart raced as she saw the dust rising in the distance. Her uncle's forces were approaching, hundreds of armed men, led by Kwame. They were ready for war, but Zuri's blood ran cold as she saw her cousin at the front of the line. He was no longer the young boy she had played with, but a man consumed by greed, a traitor to their people. Her grip on the sword tightened as she turned to Kofi. "Prepare the villagers," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "Today, we defend everything we hold dear. We will not go down without a fight." As the enemy drew closer, the villagers stood strong, ready for the battle that would decide the fate of their land and their legacy. The sound of drums echoed through the village as Zuri led her people into battle. The earth trembled beneath the weight of their footsteps, the cries of warriors filling the air. Zuri's heart raced as she charged forward, her sword raised high, her body moving with the rhythm of battle. The clash of metal against metal rang in her ears, and the smell of sweat and blood filled the air. She fought with everything she had, her body moving instinctively as she took down one enemy after another. But in the chaos, she couldn't shake the image of Kwam's face, watching from afar, his eyes filled with cold determination. She had to defeat him, for her father, for her people, for everything she held dear. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and smoke. Zuri stood in the midst of the battlefield, her chest heaving as she surveyed the destruction. The village had defended itself, but at a great cost. Bodies of fallen warriors, both from her side and the enemy's, lay scattered across the ground. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. She moved through the wreckage, stepping over broken weapons and discarded armor, her eyes scanning for any sign of Kwame. She didn't know if she would be relieved or devastated if she found him among the dead. But there was no time for sorrow now. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Zuri's heart burned with rage. She couldn't rest until the traitor was brought to justice. Zuri's breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure emerging from the smoke. It was Kwam, his clothes torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood. He had survived, but there was no joy in Zuri's heart upon seeing him. She stepped forward, her sword still drawn, her eyes locked onto his. "You betrayed us," she said, her voice cold as ice. "You betrayed your own blood, Kwam. For what? Power? Money? The lives of our people mean nothing to you." Kwam's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and defiance, but he didn't speak. He knew he couldn't deny the truth. "You should have stayed loyal to the land, to the people, to our father," Zuri continued, her voice quivering with emotion. "But you chose greed over everything." Kwame dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he looked up at Zuri. "I never wanted it to end this way," he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought if I sided with him, I could save our people from poverty. I never wanted to hurt you." Zuri's expression softened for a moment, but the anger quickly returned. "You could have saved us without betraying your own blood," she spat. "You could have fought with us, but you chose to be part of the system that destroys us." Kwame hung his head, shame filling his eyes. "I was afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of being nothing." Zuri took a step back, her heart heavy. "Fear won, Kwame," she said. "And now, we all suffer." Zuri stood in front of Kwame, her mind racing with the choices before her. She could end it all here, deliver justice and vengeance for the lives lost. Or she could choose mercy, to let him live and try to rebuild what had been torn apart. But how could she trust him again? How could she trust anyone after all the lies, the betrayals, the bloodshed? Zuri closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had to make a choice, not just for herself, but for the future of her people. "You will leave this land," she said, her voice firm. "Go. Never return." Kwame's eyes widened in shock. "Zuri, please," he began, but she cut him off. "You've chosen your path, and now you must live with it. Go, and never come back." With a final look, Zuri turned away, walking toward the village, her resolve hardening with every step. Zuri sat alone, the weight of the day settling in her bones. She had made a choice, one that would define the future of her people. As the village began to rebuild, the memory of the fallen lingered. "We fight not just for ourselves," Zuri had told the villagers, "but for those who cannot fight for themselves." She stared out across the land, her eyes searching the horizon. Her father's legacy, her people's legacy, rested on her shoulders now. And while the journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, Zuri knew one thing: she would never stop fighting. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not for herself, but for the future. The silence of the village was broken by the sound of hooves, and Zuri lifted her gaze, squinting into the distance. A rider approached swiftly, the silhouette of the horseman growing larger with every moment. She recognized the rider immediately. It was someone from her past. Her heart skipped a beat. "What is he doing here?" Zuri whispered to herself. It had been years since she had seen him, but the scars of their shared history were not easily forgotten. The man Dumi had once been close to Zuri's family, and he carried with him a history that Zuri could never fully shake. As he dismounted and approached, Zuri couldn't help but feel both anger and curiosity rise within her. "I didn't expect you back here," Zuri said, her tone cold. "And yet here I am," Dumi replied, a knowing smile on his lips. Dumi took a step closer to Zuri, his boots kicking up dust as he lowered his voice. "There are things you don't know," he said, his gaze flickering over the village. "Things I never wanted to say, but I have no choice now." Zuri crossed her arms, eyes narrowing further. "You've come to spill more lies, or are you finally going to tell me the truth?" she snapped. Dumi's face darkened. "The truth is much darker than you think, Zuri. Your father, he wasn't the man you believed him to be." Zuri recoiled slightly. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, the rage rising in her chest. Dumi's eyes softened. "Your father had made deals with the very people who sought to destroy us. And when he died, it wasn't just a random killing. It was orchestrated." Zuri's world tilted. Could everything she believed about her family have been a lie? Zuri stood in shock, the weight of Dumi's words sinking in. "How could you say that?" "My father was a hero," she said, her voice shaking. Dumi stepped closer, his eyes filled with regret. "I know it's hard to hear, but your father's actions were part of a larger plan, one that involved betrayal and manipulation. He made deals with the very forces that destroyed our people." Zuri's heart pounded in her chest. It was a betrayal she couldn't fathom. "If what you say is true, then everything I've fought for, everything I believed in, was built on a lie," Zuri whispered, her hands clenched into fists. Dumi looked at her with pity. "I'm not here to tear you down, Zuri. I'm here to help you uncover the truth so you can rebuild." Zuri looked away, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know if I can rebuild this, or even myself," she said, the despair in her voice more powerful than the anger. Zuri stood at the edge of the village, staring out into the horizon. The weight of the truth had shattered the illusion she had carried for so long. She could feel the responsibility settling on her shoulders. The betrayal was not just personal, it was cultural. Her father's actions had tainted their people's legacy. But Zuri knew that she had to rise above it, for the sake of the village, for the sake of her family. "I will not let his mistakes define us," Zuri said quietly to herself. Her resolve had solidified. She would expose the truth, no matter how painful, and seek justice for the wrongs that had been committed, not only against her family but against her people. The fight wasn't just for survival, it was for redemption. "I will take back what's mine," she vowed, clenching her fists. As Zuri turned to face the village, she felt a strong hand on her shoulder. It was her younger sister, Amina. "You don't have to do this alone," Amina said softly, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. Zuri smiled faintly, knowing that her sister understood. "No," Zuri replied, her voice steady, "but I will lead us." Amina nodded. "Then let me fight by your side. Blood for blood, sister. Together we'll restore what was taken." Zuri embraced her sister, a sense of calm sweeping over her. They were stronger together, and they would take back their future, one step at a time. The air was thick with tension as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the village. Zuri stood at the front of the gathering, surrounded by the villagers who had once been silent, passive onlookers to the unfolding disaster. "This is it," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "We fight not just for land, not just for our future, but for the soul of our people." Her words ignited something in the villagers, a spark of defiance. Amina stood beside her, a quiet but fierce presence. The betrayal had reached all corners of their community, and now it was time to fight back. "We are stronger than they think," Amina whispered, her hand resting on Sura's shoulder. Zuri nodded. They couldn't afford to fail. The power of unity would be their weapon. Zuri and Amina met with the elder, Mama Kazi, who had witnessed the destruction of their village firsthand. "It's time we speak of what has been buried for too long," Mama Kazi said, her voice steady and full of sorrow. She revealed a dark truth. Years ago, it wasn't just the antagonists' greed that had driven their downfall, but a deeper conspiracy, one that involved the manipulation of elders, the betrayal of the landskeepers, and even a trusted family member. Zuri's stomach tightened. "Who?" she asked, barely able to contain the rage building within her. Mama Kazi looked at her with sorrowful eyes. "It was your uncle Juma," she said. "He sold your father's land to the highest bidder, and it is he who now stands behind the power that threatens you." Zuri's world spun. Her uncle, her flesh and blood, had been the architect of their destruction. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air as Zuri and Amina walked towards her uncle's home. "I can't believe it," Zuri muttered, her fists clenched at her sides. "He promised me he would protect us." Amina, who had always looked up to their uncle, stood silently beside her. When they arrived, Juma was sitting on his porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes flickered with surprise when he saw them approach. "Zuri, Amina, I wasn't expecting visitors," Juma said, his tone almost too casual. "Cut the games, uncle," Zuri said, her voice steady but filled with venom. "You've sold us out. We know everything." Juma's smile faltered, and for the first time a flicker of fear crossed his face. "You don't understand," he began, but Zuri interrupted him. "No, you don't understand. We trusted you, and now you'll pay for your betrayal." The standoff between Zuri and Juma escalated quickly. "You've made your choice, Zuri," Juma said, his tone darkening. "But this is bigger than you. You can't stop what's already in motion." Zuri's heart raced, her body tense with anger and determination. "I don't care how big it is, I'm stopping you." With a sharp motion, she reached for the machete at her side, the tool of her ancestors that had been passed down through generations. We fight for more than just land, she said, her voice firm. We fight for our honor, our future, and our blood. The sound of drums began in the distance, signaling the start of the battle. Amina grabbed her own weapon, nodding at Zuri. Let's end this, she said, and together they ran towards the waiting villagers. The battle began with the sound of footsteps pounding against the earth, the tension in the air palpable. Zuri led the charge, her machete raised high. We take back what's ours, she shouted as she ran toward the enemy. The enemy soldiers, who had come to claim the land, hesitated at first, but soon formed a defensive line. Amina fought beside her, a fierce look in her eyes. They were surrounded by the sounds of battle, the clash of weapons, the cries of anger and defiance. Zuri fought with everything she had, remembering the generations of her ancestors who had fought to protect this land. This was their fight, and she would not let them down. The battle raged on, but Zuri could feel the tides shifting. Her arms were sore from the constant strikes, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. Hold your ground, she shouted, her voice rising above the noise of the conflict. Amina, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, fought with the same relentless spirit. We're winning, Zuri. Keep going, she yelled, her spear thrusting into the heart of the enemy ranks. But just as victory seemed within reach, Zuri saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Juma. You think this is over? He sneered, his voice cutting through the noise. It's only just begun. With those words he gave a signal, and more men rushed into the fray. The fight was far from over. Zuri's heart sank as she watched Juma make his move. He was always one step ahead, she muttered under her breath. Amina turned to look at her. What do you mean? Zuri's face twisted with anger and disbelief. He's been manipulating us all along. He's not just after land, Amina. He wants everything. She charged forward, her heart pounding, pushing through the pain of the battle. As she closed in on Juma, she saw him meet her gaze, his eyes filled with malice and defiance. You were always too naive, Zuri, he said with a twisted grin. This is my legacy, not yours. The truth hit her like a cold, hard slap. Her uncle had been orchestrating this war for his own gain. Zuri pushed through the chaos, her eyes locked on Juma. He was her uncle, her family, but now he was her enemy. She reached him, and the two locked eyes. You betrayed everything we stood for, Zuri spat, stepping forward. I betrayed nothing, Juma countered, his voice low but menacing. I gave our family a future, something you'll never understand. He drew a sword, its blade gleaming in the dim light. You can't fight progress with your old ways, Zuri. Zuri's grip tightened on her machete, her heart filled with righteous fury. I don't need progress, she said, her voice steady. I need justice. The battle between them wasn't just for land. It was for the soul of their people. The clash of steel rang through the air as Zuri and Juma fought fiercely. With each strike, Zuri felt the weight of her ancestors' legacy on her shoulders. She had to win, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered because of Juma's greed. Her machete moved with precision, cutting through his defenses. Juma was fast, but Zuri was faster. In one swift motion, she knocked the sword from his hand and disarmed him. This is over, she said, her voice cold as she stepped forward, her machete aimed at his chest. Juma fell to his knees, his face twisted with disbelief and anger. You've ruined everything, he spat. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. No, she said softly, I've saved everything. She raised her machete, bringing it down in a swift, final blow. The battle was won, but the cost was high. Zuri stood over the battlefield, watching as the villagers celebrated their victory. Her heart was heavy, though, as she looked at the bloodied ground. Amina approached her, her face marked by both exhaustion and relief. We did it, Amina said quietly, her voice filled with awe. Zuri nodded, but there was no joy in her eyes. It wasn't just about winning, she said softly. It was about reclaiming what was lost. Amina placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done that," she said. "You've brought us back." Zuri looked out over the village, the horizon bathed in the soft glow of sunset. She had won the battle, but the war for her people's soul was just beginning. The village stood in the quiet aftermath of the battle, but for the first time in years, there was a sense of peace in the air. The sounds of celebration echoed through the trees as the villagers began to rebuild. Zuri stood at the center, her heart still heavy, but the weight of it now seemed different. The people had survived. They had won. She glanced at Amina, who had been by her side every step of the way. "We've done it," Zuri whispered. Amina smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "No, Zuri," she replied, "you've done it. You've saved us." Zuri looked around at the village, the people, her family, and the land she had fought so hard to protect. "It was never just about fighting," Zuri said, her voice soft but resolute. "It was about remembering who we are." Later that evening, as Zuri sat with the village elders, an unexpected truth came to light. The elder who had been silent throughout the battle, the one Zuri had trusted, stood and approached her. "Zuri," he began, his voice shaky, "there's something you need to know." Zuri turned her gaze on him, her expression hardening. "What is it?" she demanded. The elder hesitated, then spoke again. "Your father. He wasn't just a victim of the land grabbers. He knew the fight was coming. He tried to warn us, but he was betrayed. He wasn't killed by those outside forces, Zuri. It was someone within the family." The shock hit Zuri like a bolt of lightning. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The elder lowered his eyes. "Your uncle," he revealed, his voice heavy with regret. Zuri's blood ran cold. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. That night, Zuri sought out her uncle. She couldn't understand how it was possible, how someone she'd trusted, someone who was family, could betray her father, her village. When she found him, he stood with his back turned, gazing out over the land they had fought for. "You knew," Zuri said, her voice low but filled with fury. Her uncle turned slowly, his face unchanged. "I did what had to be done," he said, his voice cold, emotionless. "The land, the power, it's all that matters, Zuri. Your father was weak." Zuri's chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "You killed him," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "For greed." Her uncle smirked. "No," he said, "I killed him for progress, for a future where I can rule." The betrayal was final, and the weight of it crushed her. This man, her uncle, was not the family she thought he was. Zuri stood there, her uncle's words echoing in her mind. The rage that had been building inside her finally found a release. She had a choice. She could strike him down, end it here, or she could walk away and protect her village. But revenge, she realized, wouldn't bring her father back. She took a deep breath, her grip loosening on the machete. "You're right about one thing," Zuri said, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I'm not my father." She turned away, her decision made. "But I won't be like you either." Her uncle said nothing, watching her leave. As she walked back to the village, Zuri knew that the battle wasn't over, but it had shifted. Now, it was about something bigger, preserving the legacy of those who had fought before her. The next morning, Zuri stood in the village square, her heart heavy but resolute. She could hear the sounds of her people beginning to rebuild, their spirits restored. Amina joined her, her face filled with a mix of pride and concern. "What now, Zuri?" Amina asked. Zuri looked out over the land, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Now we rebuild. Not just the land, but our people. We honor those who came before us, and we forge a future worthy of them." She turned to face Amina, a small smile breaking through the stoic expression. "The battle was never just about land or power," Zuri said. "It was about us, our strength, our unity, and our future." Amina nodded, understanding the weight of Zuri's words. They had won, but the real victory was still ahead of them.